Gary Fox, you're very welcome to the Lead Well podcast.
It feels really strange to be sitting over this side of the table. Thank you so much for the invite.
No problem at all. And it's nice to have you back on. I had you on my previous podcast, believe it or not, 4 years ago now.
It feels like no time and it feels like a lifetime.
Well, it's a bit of a lifetime because when we got in touch around that time, I think you were at episode 87.
Yeah. Gosh, what have been? I started 2019. Yeah, probably would have been bang on.
And just this week, another fantastic episode, but it's actually episode 326.
You're on the ball. 326 went live yesterday.
All I have to say is full of admiration.
Thank you.
Yeah. Also, there's a couple of things that I look forward to unpacking with you. A certain post you put up this week on your own LinkedIn, which I thought was very brave.
I love LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I love it. I try build in public, which is quite hard because I do share a lot of stuff. But I believe it's important. Like we've talked about this, about, having a brand and being able to stand over it. And I think a lot of people just post when it's good news. I'm delighted to announce that I am joining whoever. And you're like, great. Congratulations, John. See you in 4 years when you're on the next move. So I'm very big on kind of like just consistency. And you know what? It's for myself as well. It's for myself to kind of keep myself accountable because this, when you work for yourself, it's very easy to kind of like hide behind things a little and to let things slide a little and next month. So I do all those kind of posts. And I have a good story about that actually, which we can get into whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Well, why don't we get into that a little bit?
Yeah. Potentially a massive guest coming on. I'm going to do that thing now where I can't tell you, but like potentially a monstrous guest, the biggest guest I will have ever had by far, potentially coming on in May. And it came from those posts. Someone sent his PR team sent my pod to him last year. He was doing a European tour. London, and they're trying to get him to stop over in Ireland. They're like, oh, there's one pod you should do. It's this one. And they looked at him and they're like, no, it's still too small because I share everything. I share the downloads, I share the social numbers, I share everything. And his other one that he was going on was Diary of a CEO. So he's comparing it to that. And I was like, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. But then this year, they'd followed me all year. And then in January, they reached out to the PR team and they're like, been following Gary's story. Really like what he's doing. We'd love to come on. So it just shows you never know, that whole thing of you never know who's watching. But like, I think if you just stay consistent, there's very few people talking honestly and being truly open about what they're building and how they're building it. And people love to follow your journey and come along with you because by and large, people want you to succeed.
And what is it that really fascinates you about an entrepreneur's mindset?
It's trying to understand myself. That's purely what it is. It started off trying to get mentors. And so I'm just constantly seeking knowledge. I love reading. Reading is just probably the number one thing I love to do. And when I was building my last business, I found I was getting really siloed. I found I was kind of getting blinkered by what I was doing and I wasn't really growing. And I wanted mentors, but good mentors. And the best way to get them is they're busy people. The good ones shouldn't ever meet you. That's the secret, right? That's the honest truth, right? People are like, how do I get a mentor? I'm like, well, first, do you really need one? Are you just searching for someone to tell you what you already know? That's a big one. So I decided to write the podcast to be a way of doing it. I've always been fascinated by this kind of stuff anyway. I'd always been kind of playing around with content. That was originally my background, was kind of like journalism, photojournalism. And I said, right, I'm going to start a podcast and kind of document my own journey and document other people's journey as the best way to meet new mentors. That's kind of how it all started.
And it's a really nice place for it to actually, for it to flourish the way it has.
I couldn't relate to any of the US content. I was listening to How I Built This and all those kind of like American pods. And I just couldn't relate. Like I couldn't relate to someone going off and going, oh yeah, so we started and we did a small raise, just raised 50 million. I was just like, well, number one, I don't want to do that. And number two, doesn't mean anything to me, and I felt like Ireland definitely has a whole breed of entrepreneurs. Like we're a nation of entrepreneurs, I think. And people always say, oh, you're going to run out. I'm like, oh, haven't run out yet. People forget, like it's like an ever renewing resource. There's always new entrepreneurs coming. And it's what's beautiful and what I'm really, really enjoying at the minute is I've been at it so long now that it's time to revisit some of them. I'm at it in 5 years this March.
Wow.
And now you can kind of go back and revisit and go, where have you come from? Where are you going? What has worked? What hasn't worked? You know, it's really nice to be able to like do, like I'll probably do this forever. I just love doing it. And I love the whole process.
And that's really exciting because in an entrepreneur's world, a year can be a lifetime.
Yeah, it really can.
And if you're talking 5 years, you're throwing COVID and everything into that mix, obviously, in terms of, and how that would have impacted certain entrepreneurs' businesses as well.
Oh, yeah. It impacted my own. So I was running this as a side hustle, not even a side hustle. I wasn't making any money from it. I was just running it as a hobby for the crack. And I had a property management business in Dublin, and it had grown. We started in a room almost exactly this size, and in Temple Bar, and it's just me. Then it expanded to 2, then 3, then 4. And we kind of outgrew that. So we took the room next door as well. And that room was just empty. And I was like, I didn't want to let it go because we were on a really great deal. And I was kind of subleasing the other room. Standard Irish story. I was subleasing the other room. This guy had never been in there. And I was like, that's such a cool office. It had windows. That's why it was cool. Our office didn't have windows. That'll tell you how bootstrapped it was. I was like, oh, I'll keep an eye on that one. I'd love to get in there. And I saw him one day. I was like, not around much. Would you ever think about subleasing it to me? He goes, no. Then 6 months later, he texts me. He goes, oh, look, I haven't used it in the last 6 months. It's yours if you want it. I just need to leave my stuff there. And I was like, yeah, no bother. So that's how we got the second room. And then I just turned the other office into a podcast studio. And that's kind of how it started. And then COVID happened. We were in Airbnb management, so short-term management. It went from everything to zero in 4 weeks.
Right.
We lost €500,000 in 4 weeks. We were tracking every euro because we're like, oh, I remember it vividly. So the Six Nations were on in February. And that was the first major wobble, the Italian match, where we lost some bookings. We had like 50, 60 properties at the time. So it was like essentially a small hotel. And the first few people cancelled. We're like, oh, that's weird. And the girls are like, oh, do you think we should be worried about this? It's like, no, come on. Because in that game, you see it all, right? You see the wildest stories, the wildest things. You're like, no, you get used to kind of like wild stories. I was like, no, that'll be fine. And then a few visitors from Asia cancelled. I was like, okay, that's a little bit bigger. And then it was Paddy's Weekend. Paddy's Weekend is your Christmas on steroids. That's when you make so much of your money. You make enough money in Paddy's Weekend to get you through till summer. And that got wiped. I was like, oh, that's really going to sting. That's going to set us back now by a month. And then that was it. It just got worse and worse and worse. We were tracking everything. And after 4 weeks and $500,000, I just stopped tracking. I was just like,
what will be,
just keep updating the spreadsheet and we'll come back to that later.
Yeah. And actually, if we fast forward even to more recent times, you obviously went back then maybe to, as the podcast was getting, I suppose, more and more popular, you still had that business running for a period after COVID. And then you made a difficult decision, but one that you felt was important to make. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
It's a long story. I'm glad we got the hour. So during COVID, yeah, I started doing more of the pod. I was like, do you know what? I have all the time in the world because it was property management and it was intense. Like that is an intense business. It was only after I stepped back from it that I realized how stressed I was from it. And I just kind of built it to the level whereby I was running pretty well. Like the 2 people that were working for me, 2 people and a part-time member, they were just excellent. And I developed systems and I'd kind of finally learned how it all worked. And it was only kind of when I stepped back from it during COVID, I was like, God, that's a stressful business. That's hard. It's a hard way to earn a living. Great way to earn a living. Really interesting. I love property. We're only talking off camera about the property shows and stuff. I love property. I will dabble again in some point in the future. But it's an intense business. Oh my God. We might have 30 to 40 people checking in a single day. And it's all on Fridays, right? Everyone's coming for the weekend. So you might have every 30 minutes, you have a new person arriving. And it's all over the city. And there's no margin for error. And it's high pressure, high stakes. And it's when I stepped back, I was like, I'm not sure that's the business I actually want anymore. And I built it from nothing. I built it from 500 quid up to $500,000 a year turnover. And to walk away from it was difficult. But I was thinking about this coming out in the car. I've taken like 2 steps back to hopefully take 10 steps forward.
I'm curious what's going through your mind at that period when, right? Because what we really want to do on this podcast is we want to look under the hood a little bit in terms of at the business owner, the founder, how they, and I love your tagline, and we're going to get to this. I love the fact your tagline for your podcast is around master business brain and body. So talk to me a little bit about, you've built this thing from nothing. Now you know it's the time to let it go. But where does the piece around, I suppose, your identity, how much your identity is attached to that creation of yours, and then having to actually let that go? Talk to me a little bit about that.
It's a great question. Painfully and slowly is the two honest answers there. So during COVID, we had a very difficult journey on a number of fronts, and this was just one of them. And it was terrible. Like, you're ringing up people they're ringing up staff members going, look, I'm going to have to let you go temporarily, hopefully. And then eventually having the conversation going, I'm going to let you go permanently for good, and we become so close. I think that's actually two of my proudest achievements, is the two people that worked with me, what they've now gone on to do. And we're so close now. To be able to still have kept that even after what had happened is important. But my mental state then was not good. It was not good at all. I didn't know what I was going to do, if I'm honest, because you do wrap yourself up in your business. If I knew now what I knew then, obviously things are very much different. I've gone on a whole journey because of that, but you do become wrapped up and you become filled with self-doubt. I did a pod called The Worst Year of My Life. Ironically, one of the most popular pods ever. People love a bit of misery. But joking aside, it was all about honesty. I was like, this is what the last year has been like. And it was all about having to let people go, terminate relationships with suppliers, get rid of all the landlords. And then you're left with like starting again from zero, which essentially you are as an entrepreneur. And the easy thing would have been just to start it back up again. The easy thing would have been just to do what you've always done. But if you do what you always do, you get what you've always got, right? So I had to like take that pain. So I decided to let it go, but like simultaneously, it all kind of wraps together in terms of we'd been trying for a baby during COVID as well. Well, prior to COVID. And we managed to get pregnant during COVID and unfortunately had a miscarriage. And that really was incredibly heartbreaking for both of us. And that was very kind of overlaid on top of the business. They almost ran simultaneously. And you're like, okay, not sure what to do here. And genuinely, for the rest of my life, I didn't know what to do. I genuinely didn't know what to do. I always remember that week. COVID was at its worst. It was complete lockdown. You find out we had a miscarriage. I drove into Holles Street and I'd sit in the car. Couldn't go in. Oh. And then all week, we just had to wait because there's a certain procedure that happens afterwards. So all week, you just have to wait. And you're sitting there with each other in a bubble, in a literal physical bubble. And that was definitely probably the lowest point because the business on top of that. And honest to God, I didn't know what to do. I really did not know what to do. And you're doing all these home workouts and you're doing meditation and yoga. You're literally grasping at anything to try. And that was where the whole business brain body started. Because I was like, right, I need to understand myself, figure out what it is makes up the person, not just the business person, and just essentially rebuild everything, I'm not saying I'd never really focused on my mental health. I had, but not to this level. I'd never gone, right, let's be completely transparent and honest. So started counseling after we lost the baby and did that for a year. And then that was massively beneficial because just having that outlet of just being able to talk to someone about everything and just try and understand what's going on. Because when you layer on the pressure of COVID, just that, it's so unnatural. I think we haven't actually processed that. I think we've all just collectively gone, well, that was weird, and just moved on. It's so strange. I still think this every day. I think like we've just
we've skipped the grieving process.
Yeah, honestly, like I think we've all kind of like, because it's only like 18 months ago. And I think we've all gone on as normal, which as humans, we're incredibly adaptable. That is one thing I've learned as well. We are so adaptable. But I just think we haven't fully maybe processed that. So that's where the business brain and body came from. I started to rebuild everything and reassess everything. We talked about before we started about going to a functional health doctor. That was a massive part of it as well. So I was like, right, I'm going to take this as seriously as I can. I'm going to approach everything like a business. I'm going to take control of my own destiny. I think when it comes to like mental health and health in general, we can have a tendency to kind of like hand it off to someone else,
Yeah.
hand it off to a doctor, or hand it off that when something happens, we then deal with it. So I've taken a proactive approach on everything, my mental health, my physical health.
You've mentioned quite a bit there, Gary, and I really appreciate you sharing some of what you've shared, because I think, again, from the outside, and let's call a spade from the outside, and you're actually very good at doing this, I must say. You're not afraid to be vulnerable on platforms and give people an insight into what it's like running your own business, which for me, even just as someone who runs my own business, that can offer me a lot of solace when I read some of your posts. But I think there is maybe a misconception that an entrepreneur or a founder of a business, they're just made of different stuff. They've just got everything that it takes to put up with the knocks and the challenges, etc. Whereas I think a big message that we want to put out on this podcast is that, exactly as you said, there's a set of skills, no doubt, and some may come more naturally to some people than others. But there are a certain set of skills that we can develop. Like myself and obviously Dan here, we had an interesting conversation about when you look at the numbers around businesses that actually fail. Obviously nobody would start a business. Sure, you get past year one, and I'm 10 years in business now, and everybody says to me, "Oh, you've made it now because you got past year 10."
Yeah.
And you're like,
Like just some magic thing.
Yeah,
At 10, someone's handing you a key there. Oh, well done. This is the secret world you didn't know existed.
Yeah, I don't, and it's like, I don't feel like I've made it. I feel like I'm still doing the hard stuff. But I suppose the piece that really stands out, and it came from our conversation, was, this idea that maybe a business really fails. Now, yes, the idea may not be a good idea, right? But it's more about the emotional resilience of the founder. Has the founder got the emotional resilience to take the COVID, the personal life challenges, etc.? And again, that's not necessarily something that we're just born with. It's a set of skills that we can develop. We can develop those skills of emotional resilience. And it sounds like you've gone on a journey to really build those over the last number of years.
100%. Yeah, that's a beautiful summary. Yes, is the honest answer. And I've learned, to be honest, the podcast has been the biggest learning experience of my life. What I learn every week is just monumental. And it's shaped me and changed me as much as going to counseling, or as much as reassessing my physical health. Talking to people like this every week has fundamentally changed my outlook on almost everything. Because you said something about failure there. 100%. Failure is only failure if you stop. That is what I have come to believe in my heart. Entrepreneurs aren't these, like, I think the born and made thing is overblown. There's 5% of entrepreneurs that are those exceptional geniuses. And being honest, they could do anything. They could be doctors, rocket scientists, whatever. Wouldn't matter. I always say the red wires are touching the blue. They're just wired different. They're built different. They're different humans. But that's the myth. It's the 95%, the grafters like myself and yourself, who just keep going. That's what entrepreneurs are. They're people who've got that ability to just keep going. And I've definitely changed a lot over the last 5 years from that journey, in terms of resilience, and in terms of, I would often, and it's interesting you say I'm quite open, like I would have previously been really shut off. I would have bottled down everything. I would have just run away from everything, been honest. I would have just gone, I'm just not going to think about that. And just hid myself away, shied away from difficult situations, and been quite reserved. I'm still quite reserved and kind of shy, but I would use that as an excuse to pull back. Instead of kind of leaning into the difficulty, I would use it as an excuse to kind of pull back and just kind of go back to where I'm comfortable and retreat back in and kind of maybe just run away from the pain, as opposed to now I'm like, I just sit with it, face it up, and then it's never really that bad. But there was a lot of growth and self-learning that had to go on before I could get to that stage. It doesn't like, oh, now I'm evolved. It never kind of, it's all those experiences. And look, like, I definitely have come to learn that life is seasons. Life is definitely mirrors the seasons we have. There's spring, summer, autumn, winter, and like, it doesn't follow the calendar, but everyone has their winter season. Like, I've gone through my winter season now for the last kind of from 2020 to 2022. There were 2 years of winter, and now it's kind of spring where I'm like, things are bright. The days are longer. I feel brighter. I feel like more energy. Things are good. And when things are good, I've learned to really enjoy them a lot more.
It's a really nice perspective and a lens really to look at things. You're expecting that you are going to go through difficult seasons. Nobody is immune to those difficult seasons.
Yeah. And you don't want to think about it. You don't want to think about death or sickness or sadness or failure or whatever. You don't want to think about it. And obviously you don't want to spend too much time thinking about it either. But you just have to run the scenarios in your head going, okay, here's what might happen. How are we prepared for this? Do we have a plan B, C, D? Cool. If we do, on we go. Spend a little bit of time thinking about it. Don't dwell on it, but just have a plan.
Interesting, the topic we're discussing at the moment. It's, again, your ability to be open and to not be afraid to be vulnerable. For me, this week has been a tough week for me in terms of we've had a busy schedule. Like, we've been very busy. And you're speaking to it in ways there as well. I'd love to get your take on this. So I suppose one of the skills I've been able to develop is this idea of knowing when I need to really take a step back, and I need to plan a couple of days that are just completely open. Now, I know that's coming when I've got tons of ideas running through my head on how we can improve things. I might have a couple of important speaking gigs. And what I find is, as I fall into that rabbit hole a little bit, I become more critical. That little voice, that inner critic, starts to get louder and louder. So all of a sudden, I'm overanalyzing everything. And sometimes I leave it too long, to my detriment. But then something hits me and says, okay, Mark, you need to take a couple of days now. You need to step back and actually just completely free up the calendar. For yourself or for the guests that you obviously have the pleasure to interview, do you see that come up often, that, I suppose, that ability to be able to step out? Because it's tough to step back when obviously you're the face of the business, you're the one who makes the decisions, etc.
Yeah. I kept trying to come up with the solution to this. I kept trying to have, like, what's the hack? What's the, what is it? Is it a retreat? Oh, Bill Gates goes on a reading week. I don't think I could swing a reading week as much as I would love to.
Sounds nice.
It does. It sounds amazing. But so I kind of have come up with something, and it's, I big believer in compounding. Compounding is kind of driving everything I do now. And I think about it every day going, are you stacking tiny wins or tiny losses? And so stacking the tiny losses, that leads me to those places where I'm frantic, a bit manic, a bit stressed. And the faster you go, the slower you go. It's wild. You're trying to catch up with yourself. You're just like making to-do lists like it's going out of fashion. Whereas, like, and I still haven't got to the end of this. I still haven't figured this out, because that is probably the biggest challenge I still face. I think as an entrepreneur, you always face that, because you can do anything you want. That's the secret. That's why it's so addictive.
It's the gift and the course, isn't it?
Exactly. With great power, Spider-Man, right? It is. And that's why I am addicted to being my own boss, because it's not the money. It's definitely the freedom, though. It's today anything is possible. And I love that. And that is also the curse. It's exactly like you say. So I'm still trying to develop systems and processes, because I have frameworks for most things now. I've been like an operating system, business, brain, body. Because I find if I'm quite regimented in certain areas, it allows me freedom then in other areas. Because when we had our little girl, I kind of, I hate when people do that whole thing of like, changed my life. It's very cliche. But as you get older, you realize all the cliches are true, but I'll try not to fall into that trap. It just focuses the mind more, because time is when you're on your own, time is endless. When you get a partner, time is endless, but with a little more structure. And then when you have a baby, time is quite structured. There's certain things that have to happen at certain times. just has to go that way, right? Just life. They have to go to bed at a certain time. They have to have a nap, all that kind of stuff. And that can really focus my mind around, I need to be more, when I'm on, I'm on. When I'm off, I'm off. Whereas and this is, if my wife ever listens to this, she'll say, you do not apply this as consistently as you should. Because I would always like whip out the laptop at like 8 o'clock at night. And my wife looked at me going, what are you doing? I'm like, I just had an idea there for something. I'm just going to put that in this Notion. So what I'm trying to do now is 5 deep work blocks a day, 5 by 45, just deep work of whatever I'm trying to work on, and have a very clear list of that day. Here are the 5 deep work blocks that I'm doing. And sometimes I'll roll them in, because 45 isn't that long really. I'll roll them into like a 90-minute block in the morning. And I find having that structure, if I get them done by say 1 or 2 o'clock, everything on top of that then is a bonus.
Yeah.
So that's how I try to do it. Look, this is what I'm thinking now, right? This will probably change by the time we sit down next year.
But I think what you're doing is very, like, we think about it from a cognitive perspective, from a brain perspective, it's very, it's very effective, right? You're going to use most of that mental energy on focused work. Whereas actually, and I think one of the reasons I reached out to you again was you were hosting actually an awards night a couple of weeks back. It was for young founders, entrepreneurs. That's something that because I would do a little bit of mentoring with young entrepreneurs, and I find that that's something that they really struggle with, and then that leads to poor sleep.
Yeah.
They don't have those periods really of focused work. It's like, I'm a founder, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm on from the time I wake up till the time I eventually pass out.
It's so much bullshit. Not sure if you're allowed to curse in this podcast, but
sure,
there's so much nonsense. Yeah. It's just nonsense, and it's a myth propagated, and people like to brag about it, and they're in their 20s and they can do these 16-hour days. You are not productive for 16 hours. Let the old boys tell you the truth. It just isn't. Look, we've all done it. I've done it. You've done it. At the time, it feels good. Being honest, you kind of feel like, I'm a business owner now. I'm wedded to it. This is my thing. Whereas in reality, you're just, all you're doing is burn yourself out. And you're miserable because all you do is talk about the business and no one wants to be around you.
Can I ask you as well, Gary, you mentioned those 5 blocks and then you said anything else I get done is a bonus, right? And this is nearly a little bit of a talk therapy for myself asking you this question. But how do you stop that feeling of guilt coming in saying, oh, you could do a little bit more today?
I have the best analogy for this, and I only learned it 2 weeks ago. So there's massive recency bias creeping in here. I went to London to see Ali Abdaal and Sahil Bloom talk. They were talking about the 10 life lessons they've had. And that chap Ali has had a fascinating journey from graduated medicine, became a full-time doctor, quitted to go into YouTube. Has 5 million subs, makes about 6 to 7 million a year. One of the most successful YouTubers on the platform. So he gave this great analogy of when he was a junior doctor. His whole thing is productivity. That's his niche. And so he approached being a doctor. I'm going to be the most productive doctor I can be. So he got into like the hospital, and he walks in, he walks past the waiting room, and the waiting room is jammers, as they always are, right? Heaving with people. He was in the NHS in the UK, and heaving with people. And he goes in and flat out all day, and he sees like 12 people. Finishes a shift, I think 12-hour shift, finishes shift, walks out, looks in, waiting room's full. The next day he develops systems of like triage. I think he sees 20 people. Does this all week. Eventually, every day, waiting room full. And eventually the old doctor at the end of the 2 weeks' time goes, Ali, the waiting room's always going to be full. And I was like, it's just one of those things I'm like, that's exactly what it is for entrepreneurs. That is exactly what it is. When you have a normal job, your manager comes in and go, Mark, this week, I need you to do these 10 things. And this is why there's such a growth in like people doing up their houses, and because you start, finish, and end. And there's such a feeling of satisfaction when you start a project and you finish it. Because when you're an entrepreneur, you start a project, you finish it, and it just rolls into the next one, or rolls into the next one, or rolls into the next one, depending on your industry. Some industries are more binary. This is why I love podcasts. This is why I love doing podcasts, because me and you sit down, it's done when it's done, right? We do an hour and a half, whatever it is. And then it's done. It's edited, goes into the world. People can listen 10 times or 10 million times. Our work is done. after the hour and a half. And that is just the best feeling in the world.
I was going to say to you, what about all the stuff that then sits behind that, the marketing of that
Look,
episode?
I spent all week. Funny you bring that up. I spent all week working on that. Actually,
Yeah.
I have a whole production process, so a lot of it's outsourced. And I'm 5 years in now, and it's only now that I'm going. Right now, I need a professional team to actually bring it to the next level. So, like, there's always levels. It's just trying to find something. Look, I think this really comes down to something I've kind of learned. It's different for every single person.
Yeah.
We all look for, what's the secret, Mark? What is it? What's the one secret? And you're different to me, different to Dan, different to James. We're all completely, fundamentally different humans. But we're looking for this linear binary rule that works for us all.
It's not going to happen.
It doesn't work. You just need to find something that you really love doing. This is such a cliche, but you find something you really love doing. Something that just ticks your boxes inside. You kind of go, I enjoy doing this. Whereas with the property management business, I enjoyed being my own boss. I created something from nothing. I built my own business from nothing. I enjoyed that. I didn't enjoy the day-to-day of it. I found it very stressful. But with podcasting and with media, really enjoy it. There's a real good sense of satisfaction about sitting down with someone like you, having an incredible conversation, and then putting that out into the world. And then it kind of lives on.
And can I ask you, Gary, and this is maybe linking to the post that you did this week on LinkedIn, and we've got I've got some info here. Number 1 business podcast in the world.
You're so prepared. You've got notes. I never have notes.
I know, and listen, your episodes are so good. I'm trying to learn as I go. But one thing I found, and I want to get your take on this, when I started my business, I very much was attached to other people's definitions of success. So you look at society's definition of an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong, but there was like a light bulb moment I had when I was like, you know what? Actually, you've got to be chasing your own version of that success. And for some people, that just means that you get to live your day your way. You're in control. It doesn't mean that you got to scale. You got to, sell your business. For you, I suppose, have you had a similar experience? And what does success look like for you with the podcast?
Yeah, it's a super question. And it's something I've only learned in the last, again, through the podcast. Like, you've nailed it perfectly there, because we all look at other people. They're a success. No, they're not. Everyone else is a complete shit show, just like you. Everyone else is a mess, just like you. And that is one thing I've learned, is that no one has it figured out. Nobody has it fully figured out. You look at all these people and you look at their trajectory and you see it from the outside and you see it from a distance. You don't see all the heartbreak and all the difficulty and the trauma. And I've chatted to hundreds of them, and there's very few that I would go, it was exactly like they pictured. And I have this question that I ask any founder that has an exit, sell their company or whatever. I ask them this question: what did it feel like the day after? And I had to stop asking it for 2 reasons. Number one, they'd be like, oh, well, I had an earn out for 2 years, so I stuck there for 2 years. I was like, okay. Fast forward 2 years. What did it feel like the morning you woke up? And let's say they sold it for like considerable sums, right? We're talking in the millions. Anyone I'd ask would generally have sold for 5 million upwards, right? Some of them for many, many multiples of that. And I'd ask them, what did it feel like? And they'd say, almost to a person, nothing. It felt like nothing. How sad is that? Their whole life's work, nothing. Now, I'm sure it kind of feels good when they got the new car, but moments. And I asked them, like, oh, what did you plan to do? And often they go, I started again. It's wild.
I've seen it many times myself as well.
It's an addiction. But it's also, I think, not taking the time early on in the journey to do this, to sit down and go, what do I want? What is actual success? I had this conversation with an entrepreneur yesterday. His partner is scaling a business. I was like, what does she want though? Because that's the key thing. If you don't sit down and go, what's the 5-year, 10-year plan? And what do I want? Well, not what like should the business grow to? Like, we got to scale and we go international and we hire hundreds of people. And I can't think of anything worse. So you have to have that honest chat with yourself. And that's why I think peer groups and conversations like this are so important, because I'll often chat to founders and like, these are successful people. And we'll stop recording and we'll go, oh, that felt like therapy. Thanks. Because they just don't take the time.
Yeah.
You know, we're constantly forward. Entrepreneurs have this thing about forward, and I am 100% guilty of this. Forward, 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 forward. The next, the next, the next. And it's only in the last 2 years that I started a review the week, review the month, review the year. What did that look like? What did you think it was going to look like? What did you say it was going to look like? Now, you don't have to stick to it. I think this is the thing people forget. People go, oh, but I don't want to be locked in. I was like, you don't have to be locked in, but you have to have a goal.
Yeah.
You have to have a success goal, because if more is the goal, that doesn't mean anything.
No.
Because you're never going to get there. More what? More money, more staff, more products. And people get onto this track of they build a prison of their own making. They build all these structures around them thinking this is what they need. And then they realize, I've got a thing that's even worse than a job.
Yep.
Because I have all the restrictions and none of the benefits. What does success look like for the podcast, to answer your second part of your question?
Maybe just, if you don't mind, Gary, just holding on that point,
Yeah.
because what you've said there has actually really brought up two recent examples, which I think would be useful to share just with listeners. So one is a coaching client of mine, and when we started out, the goal for the business was double the revenue. I want to double the revenue. Very successful company, double the revenue. And it was only when we sat with that question and we said, okay, so, you know, why is that important for you? Why is that? Oh, because, you know, naturally, you know, we did X amount this year, so we should double it next year. Yeah, but you haven't answered the question. Why is it important for you? Like, how does that indicate that you and your business are successful? I know monetary, yes, but, you know, why is that important to you? We sat with that question for a long time. And do you think that individual's goal ended up being double the revenue the following year? As in, that wasn't the goal anymore. There was far more that sat around that goal other than, but there was also clarity on why they were going after that specific goal. So I think that's one. I think what you're saying, and we see it more and more, this idea of, I love the John Dewey quote, which is basically, we don't learn from experience, we only learn from reflecting on our experience.
That's a good one.
And I don't think we do that enough,
No.
especially, as you say, as a founder or an entrepreneur, you're constantly looking forward. And just the second example, which I think is nice to share, is I had a young founder, young entrepreneur, who rang me up the other day because they were, you know, facing a difficult problem. They felt like they were losing a bit of motivation, right? So we unpacked this a little bit, and what was brilliant was they figured this out for themselves through the conversation. But the first part of the conversation was, I was really excited when this was just an idea in my mind and I was trying to get it off the ground, right? Nobody was taking me serious.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it started to gain traction. And then all of a sudden, paying customers were actually getting interested. And this is a one-man operation at the moment. And this person said to me, and it's now that my motivation seems to be dipping. And, you know, we kind of wrestled back and forth with this. And I loved the conclusion that this individual came to. I kind of had the conclusion in my own head, but it's, as you know, much better to talk it out. So not only now had that individual got to switch from a sales and marketing mind, which is his natural mindset, he had to now move more to operations. Okay, I got to do some of the boring stuff now, the back end work, software, etc. But also what was really interesting and a great lesson he took from this was, now you're actually going to find out whether this idea in your head, which effectively, as many people say, is your baby in a lot of ways, now you're actually going to find out whether other people think it's a good idea. Now, when you're a young entrepreneur, and maybe not even just a young entrepreneur, right? There's so much of our identity attached to our business. So it was like my motivations dropped. Why? Because you're about to find out whether actually what you've come up with is any use.
Yeah. I love that. That's so funny. I'm doing a session tomorrow for young entrepreneurs. Well, actually, they're not young entrepreneurs, they're all age entrepreneurs. It's a day long session about starting your own business. And that's the first slide. Why do most businesses fail? And the spoiler is because they never start. And that is, that's so funny you brought that up today. Yeah, that's exactly it. Because now you know rubber's going to hit road. You're going to see if it's going to work or not. Because it feels lovely having an idea. It feels really good because it's like the, new year, new me. Next year, I'm going to get those abs, and it's the same with a business. You feel that kind of like, oh, I have this great idea. And then you got to make it happen. And that's what separates people. I think that's, the entrepreneurs and the people who kind of like talk about it all the time versus people like you alluded to earlier, like what separates them is that grit. It's that like, right, now let's get it. And then there's a further learning there about maybe you're not the person to operate. Maybe you hire someone to either your partner or you hire them to run operations. There's a huge learning there as well.
Yeah, I love this idea. I don't know if you've come across this, Gary, but this idea of a visionary and an integrator within a business. I don't know if you've read, is it Gino Wick's Traction, basically. Yeah. But what you're speaking to there, maybe you're just born to be the visionary. So coming with the ideas, inspiring the people as you grow. But as an integrator, operationally, you're not the guy. And actually being able to notice that, or either notice it the other way where you're operationally very good, but you need someone who can develop the business.
The show person.
Yeah.
Know thyself. That's the third slide is know thyself. Before you start anything, know thyself. Know why and know what you're good at and what you're not. You probably won't know. So do it all for the first 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is. But then know thyself and go, right, be very honest. Self-awareness is hugely rare.
Yes.
Hugely rare. And being able to be truly honest. And look, I think that a lot of that comes with experience as well.
And I think what you said there as well, you mentioned that you're obviously delivering a workshop on this. I think it really speaks volumes to you and your passion for this, because I know that you're an academic lead in Tangent and Trinity around entrepreneurship. And I can only imagine the value that those young minds will be getting from the session you're going to do with them.
It's fun. It's really interesting. Yeah. And I do it because it's really fun and interesting, but it makes me better. It makes me a better communicator. It makes me better. To be a teacher, you have to be a good communicator and you have to be able to not manage people. Manage people is the wrong word, but being able to bring people on the journey with you for an hour, and then it's 2 hours, and then 3 hours, and then tomorrow's a day. And I just learned so much about myself from those sessions as well. So you get a huge amount out of it.
You mentioned that, and just because you mentioned it, you spoke about communication there and the art of communication. If I was to ask people listening to this podcast, picture an entrepreneur, picture a founder, I'm sure many people are picturing this frantic individual who just has massive amount of energy, can get so much stuff done in the day. And it's that old school leadership of, I will lead and you will follow. What's the importance when we think communication as an entrepreneur, as a founder, as you're building that business and you're trying to get people around you to buy into that idea?
I think it's changing. I think thankfully it's changing. Like there was a few good things that came out of COVID. I think one of them was people now kind of do see the business brain body thing far more. I'm hearing that more and more. Yes. People are now saying, going, oh, you seem to have a good balance of things. You're in the gym, and, that kind of thing, as if it's a mental thing to do. You're in the gym and you're doing this and you're doing that. So I do think people have more balance, but I also think people have now learned that communication is changing because a lot of it's remote now, and people now have far more choice, and people have kind of gone, I don't think I want to do that anymore. So many people I've chatted to are either taking the plunge to be their own boss, or they're taking the plunge to go to a 3-day week and they're going to do their passion for 2 days. So I think communication has to change. I think we're at a real tipping point, if I'm honest. Yeah. Macro stuff, I kind of avoid going too macro on the thing because it gets a bit airy-fairy and no one can predict the future. But I think we are in a bit of a tipping point with the world and the world of business, that it is changing. People are getting more empowered to location independent. They can go and travel. They can work from anywhere. That is a bit of a myth. Everyone wants the laptop lifestyle, but you got to grind like hell to get it. I think that's the bit people are missing, is that it's doubly hard to have that freedom because there's a payoff. But I think to be a communicator, I think authenticity, if I was boiling it down to one thing, is the thing I resonate with.
Yes.
I can tell when someone has not been authentic with me in the pod. I can tell when it's a PR spiel going, oh, great, you're here to sell what? Funding, is it? You're looking for funding? And I can always tell. And, you know, there's certain pods you do and they're great and they're fun and they're energy giving. And there's certain ones you do, you're like, and then what happened? You know, and you're like, give me something.
Yeah.
Give me something here, you
Yeah.
know? And it's the authentic ones that I'm like, oh, you're my kind of person. I click with you. I get on with you, you know, and they're the people I want to surround myself with. Because the big thing in the pod for me is building a community of people around me. Community is the most overused word in marketing at the minute. I don't mean community. Take that back.
We say that a lot of Fifth Vision. So
A group of people. I think everyone doesn't know what it is yet. During COVID, everyone wanted to build a community. I like just a group of like-minded individuals around me, because it's definitely, for entrepreneurs, it's probably the top 3 things I'd say to do is to surround yourself with people on the journey.
it can be very siloed, a very
Massively.
lonely
And
journey, as many say.
That's why I love these pods, and that you can tune into someone's mind for an hour. That's why I do them. It's like, you know, if you don't have that group of people around you, if you're from an area that doesn't have like a vibrant entrepreneurship community, it's easier said than done.
Yes.
I'm always conscious of that. It's always easier said than done. And I think back to myself like 15 years ago or whatever, I just wouldn't have known where to start it. And I would have been too scared, if I'm honest. I would have been too scared to go. I hate going to big networking things. Hate it. Dread it. Avoid it at all costs.
Yeah.
Because you're relying on serendipity and you're surrounded by people who are like, let me give you my card. And you're like, I don't want your card.
And I would second that. And so any founders, entrepreneurs, young or old, listening in, you've got to get to those events, but you are probably going to want to resist actually stepping into that room. Yes.
Do this. Find people one-to-one. Or if you're going to events, know who's going and have reached out to them already.
Yes.
Or
Great tip.
the great hack, be on the stage. That's my hack. I'll go if I'm on the stage, and I don't mean that from a narcissistic point of view as it sounds, but that's the value, is to be up there asking the questions or giving the talk or doing something, sitting down there in a row of 400 people. It's kind of like watching Netflix. You're going to get a bit of entertainment out of it. Maybe you might pick up 1 or 2 gems, but you're relying on serendipity to go, I happen to be sitting beside Mark. It happens.
It did. It actually happened to me recently. So
see, there's always an exception,
it's
right?
Funny that you say that.
Like, you're relying on that though. But how many events founders don't realize their time is the only thing they have, really.
Yeah.
When you boil it down, and if you're going to, and I see this all the time. It's the one mistake I see founders make all the time. They're at every event, and you're like, when are you working? When are you doing the work? Because those networking events feel like work.
Yes.
You feel like you're hustling.
But nobody is. No, how often does somebody buy from you at one of those events? Like, you may start a relationship there,
yes,
but as you say, it can be a hell of a lot in terms of expense, in terms of your time, for very little return.
You got to make sure the juice is worth the squeeze. You got to be a
Yeah.
bit smarter. You got to be a bit more strategic about how you do it. Maybe you go for an hour. Maybe you meet 3 people that you've already arranged to meet. That's how I would do it, and that's how I do any of these events now. I go, if I have one person to meet, I will chat to them, have a look around, see what's happening, and then I'm gone.
Yeah.
Because it's not a good use of your day. Like, the great hack I teach all entrepreneurs is, what is the value of your day? And the amount that can answer that is, I can count on one hand, unless they're consultants or something. They know the value of their day.
That's a different story
And that's a different thing.
altogether.
But it's the exact
Yeah.
same for everybody. It's the exact same
Yeah.
for everybody. You have a value to your day. I have a value to my day. And when I did that about 2 or 3 years ago, picked a figure and went, read Naval Ravikant's book, heard him on a podcast and read that book. And he put a figure on his day, and he goes, pick an outlandish figure. I think he said $5,000 a day. Picked something outlandish to put himself under pressure. And then he was like, he put everything through the lens of, what am I doing in the day? How much is it an hour? Okay. Am I doing activities that are worth €250 an hour? If I'm not, I need to have a strong look at myself.
Yeah, some excellent tips there as well, Gary. Thank you for that. And just briefly to speak to the communication piece that you touched on there, the reason I asked you that was, I'm doing some research myself at the moment, and it's mainly with CEOs, but some of which are founders as well. And I asked them about the aspect of, in terms of, what do you feel makes you an effective leader? Like when it comes to, because you can scale a company to a certain level, but then I suppose the presence of that leader, that individual becomes critically important and a lot harder because as we're talking here, time is money effectively. And what they said was become a very effective communicator and focus on building relationships. That comes up time and time again. So even to the point where some have got to completely change how they would normally communicate with individuals. They may be introverts and it's not natural from them just to go down to the cafe area and just sit down randomly with, but they all see the value in that. So that idea of, as you say, the way we're working is completely different. How we retain talent is completely different. And these business leaders are saying it's how effective you are at communicating and the time you put into building relationships with those people.
Yeah. Those people are everything, right? The relationships you have. And that's why I love doing the pod, is that it gives me a chance, because when you're a solo entrepreneur and you work for yourself, you don't have a team or a staff or a group, and it can be lonely. And that's why you need that peer group around you. You need support. Like, we're social creatures. You need support because you start second guessing yourself. You talked about it yourself, about getting frantic and getting a bit kind of, oh gosh, I'm doing the right thing. Whereas when you bounce it off someone, you kind of go, actually, no, I'm okay. And generally, you said it as well about, advice. Generally, you can know the answer yourself already. You've already, it deep down. You're just kind of second guessing yourself, and you've got too busy to let your mind quiet, let the puddle go still.
Yes.
And then kind of go, I already know this. I've got it. It's okay. But when you have a few people around you that can just bounce things off, and especially I'd advise trying to build it over time. Find a few people in your life that you can keep around you that know you.
Yes.
That can kind of know your traits and know when you're slipping into your old habits, your shadow self's coming out or whatever it is.
Very good.
They know you because you're the easiest person to lie to. You go, sorry, Gary, had a hard week. Let it go this week. Nope. No. You're just doing that thing you said you weren't going to do.
Oh, I completely agree. And I'm looking back on my week, and I have a few of those people who've been able to, have a word in my ear this week, thankfully.
And not in a, what you should do.
No.
Generally, the great ones are just go, what was the story there?
Yeah.
Just ask.
Because we don't like that. Nobody likes that. Nobody likes being told.
It's the worst way to communicate in the world. You're talking about good communication, bad communication. Bad communication.
I had a session with a person during the week, a fellow business owner, and I love the line at the end. So he said to me, in these conversations, I never give advice. I just talk. And I walked away from that actual session with more clarity than I had in any other conversation I had that week. And not one bit of advice was given.
Bad advice can be terminal.
Yeah.
Bad advice can be terminal. I interviewed a founder last week, and she was given the wrong advice. And because she was a first-time founder, she took it, ran with it. 2 years wasted. And it was only after 2 years she just went, no.
Yeah.
And went back to what she knew herself. She knew the answer all along. It was her original vision. And she went to a few people. And you have to be very careful with advice.
Yeah.
I very rarely give it. I teach a lot of stuff, but I leave it to, it's all about interpretation. It's all about what you do with that advice. Advice is very, very, very dangerous. Invaluable. Take as a lot of it as you can. Apply 5% of it.
Yes. And as you said yourself, you probably have the answer yourself inside. It's just about maybe creating a space or an environment where you can explore that.
And don't put people on pedestals.
Yes.
Don't look up to everybody.
Yeah.
Have role models that you model yourself on. And they're the bar you set. You always need people that are above you, and not above you, it's the wrong word. You always need people who are setting a standard.
North Star, yeah.
Exactly. They're setting a standard. You're like, that's going to be a push.
Yeah.
I need to push to get up there. If it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. That is one thing I think about all the time. If it's too easy, it's not going to change you. It's not going to transform you. You need people that are just pushing hard. People are on the verges of extremes. You're going to go, right, I need to get myself towards that level.
So, Gary, let me come back to the second part of the question.
Okay.
What does success look like?
I've forgotten what the second part of the question was.
We've gone down many roads there, but the second part of the question, and it referred to, I loved your honesty this week on LinkedIn, where you basically have outlined what your goal for the business is this year. Part of that goal is striving towards being the #1 business podcast in the world.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about what success looks like for you with the podcast.
So I've thought about this a lot, and I do accountability sessions with a friend of mine, James, every quarter, now every month. And that's to refine the vision. That's to keep refining the vision of what I want. 10-year plan, 5-year plan, 3-year plan, 1-year plan. It's broken down into quarters. And then that's an operating system that operates within that. So it's all very regimented. And you have to have outlandish goals. I believe you have to have goals that are almost laughable. You have to.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to be the number one podcast in Ireland. Okay. That is a good goal if you're starting out, and you have to kind of build upwards. I couldn't have said that 5 years ago. Might have thought it. But you have to have goals because I now see it's possible. That's why I said it this week. I now see that I've looked into the sausage making factory. That's not that difficult. It's not impossible to make the best sausage, right?
Yeah.
It's just, I kind of know the formula now. It's doing the reps. Done 326 reps. I will probably do 1,000 to get to that goal. I've no doubt about that. This is a long-term play. This is a long-term thing. Many things will have to happen for that goal to happen. But I think I have definitely suffered in the past from chronic low confidence, extremely low confidence. And to combat that, I'm trying to go the complete opposite direction. I'm just setting myself very high standards and putting myself in the public, not in the public eye, no one really cares, putting myself accountable to other people. To go, this is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to skip episodes. I'm not going to miss. I'm going to get better guests. I'm going to get published twice a week. Here's the formula for what I'm going to do. And I'm going to hold myself accountable to that. That is like success. But to be honest, cheesy answer alert coming up. Put down your coffee if you don't want to spill it. Being able to do this on a Friday afternoon is success today. Being able to come out with you, spend an incredible hour having a great conversation that I really enjoy on a Friday afternoon, having the freedom and the flexibility to do that, that's success today. And success tomorrow will be going in, delivering a brilliant lecture. And I boil it down to the day. I zoom out. What's the year plan? What's the 10-year plan, 5-year plan? Great. Lock that in. Zoom back in for the rest of the month. And it's back to the day because the low confidence. And I've gone for the last 16 months, I've gone to like psychotherapy, counseling every 2 weeks to work on those issues. I didn't go because something was wrong. Yeah. I went preventatively. Yeah. I went to go. I walked in, I was like, this is what I want to work on. He was like, all right, cool. He's great. But like, there's a psychology of like, go to the doctor when you're sick. You go to psychology when there's something wrong. And I did that before. I went to therapy after we lost our first miscarriage. And then it was like, right, we got through that. And then we got out the far side, had a beautiful daughter. And then 2 weeks after we had her, I started counseling again. It's like, right, now I owe it to her to be the best possible version of myself. And it's not selfishness, but you have to be selfish to look after yourself. Because if you're not the best version of yourself, you're robbing her on so many different levels. You're robbing her now because you're not going to be present, you're not going to be happy, and you're robbing her in the future because you won't make good decisions that will lead to a longer lifespan. So there's many, many levels of success that I look at now. So it's across business, brain, body, but it's also like family success. There's so many different levels to success, and I have so many different barometers. But essentially, if I was boiling it down to, I set very ambitious long-term goals and then zoom right back down to the day and do that review process then at the end of the week and the end of the month. Allow yourself to zoom out a little bit. And I find by doing that, it helps with the low confidence issue and it helps with procrastination. Because I find when my confidence was super low, I would freeze. And I would just be like, the overwhelm would just become so much that I would just sit there and just like not even know what to do. And often I'd write off a day. I don't even think I've told anyone about this before. I'd often just write off a day. Yeah. Especially when things were really bad in the middle of COVID. I'd just be sitting in my office, just like looking out the window. And then sometimes I get to like 2 o'clock. I was like, just start again tomorrow. And sometimes that's the answer.
Yeah.
Genuinely. Yeah. Sometimes that is the answer. But I found these kind of like, by really digging in, really getting under the skin of what's causing the root issue, blockages. We all have these blockages, right? Trying to figure out what are the blockages that's causing, and you kind of might It's like when you've a pain in your back. Generally, it's your leg or it's just something else is transferring up. Generally, when you've a blockage or something going on, it's generally something else.
Yeah.
It's deeper, and it's something else that's causing you to ripple down the effect.
What's funny about this, Gary, is the way I'm trying to end this podcast is to ask individuals, what's a most valuable lesson or learning? I think we've got an incredible one there to finish off our conversation today. Can I just say, I really appreciate the wisdom you've shared, but also your vulnerability throughout our episode today. And I'm full of admiration for you, and I wish you the best success with that goal that you've set as well.
Thank you so much. This was an incredible amount of fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gary.